Losing Your Own Style and Aesthetic, we have three great artists here today joining us who will be talking about their work. We have Norie Sato, Sarah Thompson Moore, and Melvin Freeman. When artists receive commissions, whether it's their first one or they're fairly new to it, a lot of, there's also often a difficulty in transitioning from a studio artist into a public artist. Issues such as durability, accessibility, safety, city codes, as well as stakeholder and community interests often come into play in how an artist develops concepts for their project. And it can often cause issues as far as how to balance all of those issues versus their own aesthetic. And so our artists today are going to just go through their past experiences working in public art and any issues that they confronted as they were working on certain projects. So up first, we have Norie Sato, who is in a number of public art collections throughout the country. And so we're just going to start with Norie. Also, before we get going, if you have questions for our artists today, please use the Q&A function to submit questions. And if you have a specific question for one of our speakers, please put their names in the beginning. Otherwise, we'll, if it's open, we'll just kind of pose it to one of the artists. All right.
Okay. I want to apologize at the beginning because I have a ton of slides and images, and I'm going to be moving very quickly, but I really wanted to give you a bunch of different strategies just to stuff your toolbox. And you can take the stuff out that you want and throw away the things that you don't want, but just to really give you kind of an overview flow of how concepts might work within the public art field. And so this first slide, I just want to say, should really say your vision, not the vision, because there really isn't a single way to approach things. Next. So often we think kind of like this, what have I gotten myself into? And I will just say that even for people who have done a lot of projects, every project seems to start like this, for me anyway. So taking the leap, that's the most important thing that we do, is to really put our faith in ourselves and our ability to do the work that we would like to do. Next. So for me, the concept is really the most important thing that we as artists can contribute to this whole process. It's where we can use our resources, our thinking, our talent to really develop that important artwork. And there are a lot of other parts of the process where other people you can call for help, but sometimes the concept is a very lonely process, even though others become involved in it. Next. So what are you thinking about in terms of what the artwork will be about? And really what we do is to bring meaning to a place and to a project and really to the entire environment. And I can't stress more that questions are the most important aspect of the work that we might do to start developing the concept. Next. So you might say, well, is there a metaphor that you're interested in working about to, a story? And thinking about how it would relate to site and how it relates to your own personal work. Next. So you might ask yourself, what is it that you like? Can what you're interested in as an artist personally be also moved into a much more public realm? The trick is really to find those interests between your personal interest and those of the public itself. And then, you really want to look at all these different aspects. Just asking questions at the beginning becomes really so important. Next. So I would suggest that one looks big and small. Go outside the scope a little bit, stay inside the scope. You just are really trying to test limits and ideas at this very initial development stage. The what if questions are really important. What if you got rid of this? What if this happened? What if that happened? What if we change this? Those are the kinds of questions that help you really learn. Next. So here are just some general strategies. One of the most important ones is to really look at the site. So the site becomes something that is important. Sometimes for some of these projects, the site doesn't really exist yet, but you still want to go to where the project is happening and look around. Who's around there? Who hangs out there? Who uses it? What is it going to become? Talk to people. Think about what you think this place might need. And then, is there a purpose for it? Like a function, a bench, a memorial, a celebration. Next. So really just keep digging. I say dig, dig, dig is what we really need to do to really get a better picture of what's going on. Look at the natural elements, look at the history, look at, what's underneath the ground, what's the geology like, what's above in the sky, those kinds of things we really want to explore first and look for things that maybe not are as obvious to see. Next. So, are there trends that start emerging from the information that you see? Are people bringing up certain facts? Are there certain things that you keep seeing over and over? But then the question that you have to ask yourself is, do I really have to go in that direction that's the most obvious? Is it too trite? Is it factual? Do you care? These are the kinds of things that you want to look at. For instance, in this Ralph Helmick piece, which is for a brain center at MIT, you can see that he's looking at pieces that then come together depending on your viewpoint. So there's no really right or wrong answer. It just can be really looking and thinking about what makes the most sense. Next. So you might think also about, how does the artwork live in the world? Is it going to incorporate time in some way? Is it temporary? Does it appear and disappear? Is it only visible at night? Is it only visible during a certain season? Does it come and then disappear? Is it a social action piece? For instance, the Conflict Kitchen that John Rubin put together in Pittsburgh that really creates food from areas that are in conflict around the world. So he's really looking at things from a completely different way of action as well as art. Next. So then think about where it will be placed much more specifically. Who will use it? What is it about? Where does it live? Is it going to live in a certain location, or does it happen in many different places around the site? Next. Is it an urban location? Do you want to think about what that urban context is? Are there going to be a lot of people around it at a certain time? Or is it really visible only by moving, like a car, for instance? Next. Does it happen in a park? Because we tend to, even if it's an urban park, we tend to experience these spaces differently than we might experience a street. I especially love this on the bottom left, the Tony Tassett piece called Magnolias, which it is a cast bronze magnolia tree. During the spring, it kind of blends in with the rest of the park, with other magnolia trees. But in the winter, it's still blooming. In the fall, it's still blooming. It doesn't change the way nature changes. And so it really starts to bring into question how we take assumptions about nature, seasonality, and all these other aspects of being in a place. Next. Does it happen in a neighborhood? You know, is there a scale differential that comes into play when it's a neighborhood versus a big urban space? Maybe it just depends on what the neighborhood is. Who is there? Do we look at things and spaces differently and our relationship to them because it's in the place that we live? Does that make a difference? How do we deal with that? How do we make those much more human experiences and human connections work? Next. What about transit? Transit often has a lot of public art opportunities. Do we think about the spaces that are differently because it's a transit space, because one moves through it? There are a lot of times we experience artwork in transit where we never physically get close, that it's seen through the moving vehicle, from a bus. We might not stop at that particular stop ever and get off the bus, but the artwork can still create an identity and an experience for us. And how do we deal with those kinds of experiences differently from those that we kind of can come up to close and actually feel? Next. Is it an interior piece? You know, how do we talk about that interior? Do we have to look specifically at what that interior is? How much do we relate to what that space is about? How much do we relate to the architecture or not? Is it in opposition or is it in harmony? Those kinds of things really help us kind of develop what that idea might be, what that idea might become as well. And, you know, those are all aspects that we need to think about. Next. So, you know, really thinking a lot about how those spaces are experienced may also help us think about how our concepts might develop. Are they very detailed? Do they develop over time? Are they pieces that you can kind of glance at and get the entire totality of the artwork itself? Next. I'm a big fan of looking at edges and looking at what's around, not just what's in the center. And we really might want to think about what is around it. You know, how does the work relate to it? Does it stick out? Does it blend in? Does it bring in the adjacencies that we might think about in sight? Or does it stay within its boundaries? Next. Does it tell a story? And how do we uncover those stories that we might be interested in telling? Does the site have its own stories? Or do we really look for stories and make those connections ourselves? Does it have to tell the true story, or could it be a story that we might make up? Are there ghosts, for instance, or spirits in a place that we might draw on to become part of our concept? Next. So, do we allow the public to come in and experience a space, not just from afar, but actually by becoming part of the artwork itself? In this Candy Chang piece, Before I Die, she really is looking at this building, which may not have a long life. And yet she's making us connect to that sense of fragility of life. And what do we have that we would like to incorporate in our lives as before we die? And so to make us think a little bit more about our place in the world and the place of the environment and the places that we are, and it's their lives as well. Next. Functionality is really something that often comes up in public art. How do we take the function and make it into something that is also delightful or unexpected? Do we use it as part of the idea? Does the functionality an expression of the functionality become actually part of the artwork itself, or do we take the functionality and use it as a vehicle to express another idea? Next. Just some other ways that functionality can come into it. Does it express, is it, narrative? Is it also very, take us through a space as well? There are lots of aspects, I think, of functionality that play into how we look at our concept and how that might make these places much more interesting and add that layer, the art and conceptual layer. Next. Does it interrupt how we go through our lives? Does it make us think a little bit about where we are? Does it make us stop and just take kind of a moment to do something that we might not normally do? Next. What about light? There's so many different ways to incorporate light within the world. For instance, in this Ben Rubin piece, it's a chandelier, but the chandeliers also use quotes from Shakespeare, words from Shakespeare that are randomly generated and appear on the blades of light, for instance, on this piece. So it gives you something not just to look at, but also to think about in this kind of theatrical setting. Next. Does the art provide a wayfinding function? Is it used for directing us in one way or another? Or does it take us into a path that is maybe a little bit confusing? Is that important and is that relevant? Or is it just something that maybe doesn't make any sense? We need to think about that when we develop the work that we are thinking about. Next. Does it make a place? Does it mark a place? Does it make some place that is notable? Do you remember a place because of the artwork there? And how does that give you a sense of what the place is? Does it give you a hint? Does it give you, some sense of history or a way to engage? Next. So, all of these things I think are very important because memory becomes a part of our experience as well. And the concept and the artwork and how it works within a space becomes really, really important in terms of how we think about our work and how it plays within the space. Next. I love the idea that skateboard parks have now become places for art and expression as well. It's not just physical expression that happens, but there's also a visual expression that really distinguishes one place from another, one way that we might play from another place where we might also play. Next. Memorializing and commemorating is also a really important aspect of how our concept might be, and to think about what it is that we are commemorating and memorializing and how best to do that becomes also part of our role of developing concepts. For instance, in this Janet's White piece, the artwork really commemorates the constellations of, at the time of the death of the person who is commemorated in this park, happens to be a child. And so, you're really thinking about that moment where the transition occurred from life to death and how the artwork commemorates that moment. Next. Materials can also be part of the concept, and we have to think about that as well. How best is the concept portrayed? And materials can provide that. I don't think materials alone can be a concept. I do think that some people think that, I don't agree, but the materials definitely do play into how we think about how our concept is expressed. Next. Sometimes, though, materials can be discovered at the site or from the, let's say, the department where the artwork will be. For instance, in this Jen Dixon place, it was a part of the, I believe, the Seattle Department of Transportation site, and she used road signs and stop signs to create this super delightful artwork along the trail. Collaboration is another process that we often use to develop our artwork, and that is something that is often not done in studio work. I think in public art, we need to make room for that, and how we collaborate not only with others working on the project, but with the site itself becomes really part of the concept of trying to develop what our overall concept might end up becoming. Next. We think about how to experience a piece and really just keep thinking about those elements that speak to you and how that might be expressed in the experience by the people who use these particular sites. Does it make you perform? Do you want it to do that? Do you want just people to look at it from afar? How much of that interactiveness are you interested in kind of incorporating? Next. The affordability of the concept also will play into it. We can come up with a great concept, great material, but if we can't afford it, what good is it? So all these elements we do have to keep thinking about as we are developing the concept, even though the idea is still the primary, these other things do enter into developing that. Next. So I'm just going to go really quickly through one example of an image of a project that I did, just to show you sort of very quickly how I worked in this particular project. And I have to say, I work in so many different ways that sometimes it's not necessarily typical, but I think it is really important to kind of see that train of thought. So this is an aquatic center. This is the completed project in Scottsdale, Arizona. And one of the things next that I was very interested in is the combination of natural elements. I've been really interested in the structure of plants and how they kind of are so different actually between different areas. And because I'm from the Northwest, I really look at kind of the environment of the Southwest and the structure of the plants in the Southwest with curiosity. And I've really enjoyed the kind of sculptural nature of cacti and how they contribute to the natural landscape. Next. Because it's an aquatic center, I was also interested in how water and light kind of play on this whole area, and how could I incorporate that within the artwork as well. Next. So I started out by really looking at where the opportunities are for the artwork and what my interest might be in the artwork itself and where I might be going in terms of direction. So this is like my first conceptual board. What am I thinking about? And you can kind of see that I'm looking at light, cactuses, cacti and their structure, possibly some function, and thinking about from the very broad, narrowing down as I go. Next. So I started thinking about the structure of plants, and because of the way I was interested in looking, I started to look at paper and how paper might work and express the structure of the plant itself. And could I use that as a way to express the concept and kind of figure out a way that that might go toward making the artwork itself. Next. So I looked at the opportunity of a screen for this aquatic center, because behind the screen was a water slide. And many of the neighbors, which I discovered in public meetings, are horrified by the sight of a water slide, especially the color, because the color was too jarring for this desert landscape, because they were thinking about yellow and orange for the water slide. And many of the neighbors who looked on this site did not want to see that. Next. So then I was like, okay, how could I incorporate light? And because it's in the Southwest and there's so much sunlight, I was really interested in how we could maybe get that, the reflectiveness of light and the movement of light across a surface to work within this artwork as well. So I was combining the whole idea of movement and light and plant structure. Next. But then I had to figure out how to make it. That was not so easy. And I actually, in this process of trying to make it, depended a lot on the collaboration with the architects that I was working with. And I was so lucky to have really great, interested architects who were willing to work with me to figure out how I might incorporate these concepts within the actual structure. So making the concept into reality is definitely part of it, and was a big challenge for me to try to figure it out. Next. So here we are in process. The only way we could figure out to develop the screen was they had to do a mock-up for each particular shape because of the geometry of it. And then to develop the reflective dots behind, I had to put together, 5,000 reflective Mylar dots in a way that was permanent and would allow it to still fluctuate and not deteriorate so much over time. Next. So you can kind of see, here's the piece in final form. That in a way, one of the things I was so interested in was how the piece changes with the different lighting scenarios. And you can see here that depending on how light works within the site itself, really shows how the piece works as well. And it's a constantly changing screen, I think, that reflects what's behind, what's in front, during different parts of the day and different seasons. Next, just a view of the back. So you can kind of see how the pieces were installed on the layers here. The front of this is the back of the screen where the dots are installed, and they flutter in the light. And depending on the angle of the sun, they project. And as I showed you in the previous slide, sometimes they don't project. So that's just a really wonderful surprise. And as the people who are using the slides go up the stairs, they have a whole different view of the artwork. And it's kind of like a very lively scenario back there. Next. Again, a view of the completed artwork. So I just have a couple of things that I want to say. Don't give away your concepts for free. People always ask for that. Can't you just come up with a concept on the back of a napkin? No, you might be able to, but it is so much a part of what we do. I'm very much against trying to do things for free. I think it's very important. Art is not a bandage for design mistakes by other people. So be very wary about falling into the trap. It may do that in the end, but it is not your role or the artist role to really fix problems. And then, of course, make something that means something to you and not just the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Norie. That was extremely informative and thoughtful.
Sorry, I went a little over time, but.
All right. Go through the last few. So up next we have Melvin Freeman, who recently completed a project here in Seattle in the Central District, and he's here to talk about his work of engaging with the community, how that informed his project.
Hey, good morning, everyone. First, I want to just give a thanks for the Office of Arts and Culture for allowing me to be here today. And before I get into my presentation about my experience with my first public piece of artwork that is permanent, I'll give you a little bit about myself. Next slide. My name is Melvin Freeman. I'm also known as the Fly Blind Guy, and I am a mixed media artist and photographer from the Central District of Seattle, Washington. And first, I'll tap into my moniker, the Flying Blind Guy. I'm a blind mixed media artist. And during my art journey is when I noticed that I was blind. And the reason why I'm here today is because I didn't give up. I actually quit my day job to take on art full time when vision got too heavy for me. But my love for art started way before the blindness started. As I said, I grew up in the Central District of Seattle, and I grew up in the golden era, which was the 1980s through, I would say, 1996. And that's where I developed my love for art. As a kid, I would look out the window and I would see graffiti writers. I would see people break dancing, or I would say breaking down cardboard to break dance on. And I was very attracted to the aesthetic of hip hop culture. And I was attracted to the sound of hip hop. And, you know, that was the soundtrack to the streets. And at about 9 years old, I started my creative expression by probably tagging on walls. I was tagging in the alleyways. I was markers and writing on anything I could, and writing on the bathroom stalls at school. And that furthered, and through high school, I started tapping in more to the fashion perspective of art and expressing myself creatively through fashion. And I was dyeing shoes. I would color the stripes on my Adidas and dye shoes in different colors to match outfits. And that continued into the early 2000s. And somewhere around 2004, I got my hands on the Nikon camera. And at that point, I fell in love with the camera. I started taking pictures of my life, my culture, the things that resonated with me, my community. And I didn't want to be the quote unquote the wedding photographer, or the photographer that took family pictures. I wanted to offer more. I didn't want to be boxed into the title of photographer. So I started, you know, digging within myself and taking pictures of my culture, my neighborhood, the street element of my neighborhood and the community. And, you know, more things that surrounded the life of the streets and hip hop culture in my community. And during my journey with the camera, that's where I found out I was going blind. I was sitting in class one day in a photography class, and I looked through my camera and I noticed that I wasn't able to see throughout my left eye. So long story short, or short story shorter, once I noticed I was going blind, I hung up the camera and I didn't touch it for a couple of years. And after dealing with that, I picked back up the camera and I started pushing a little bit further. And it was the camera that, to be a professional artist, to pretty much give artistry my everything. And again, not wanting to be a basic photographer or the wedding photographer, I learned more about creating, being more hands-on. I started figuring out a way to present my art in a way that other photographers didn't. So I started custom framing my art. I started adding resin to my art. I started adding different things to the art to make my pictures three-dimensional. And here I am today in front of you because I didn't give up on myself. So, you know, from me to you, I would like to say, don't never give up on your dreams, no matter what your adversity is. You know, art is the one thing that freed me. It's the one thing that gave me a peace of mind during the tough times that I'm dealing with in my life, or the tough times that I've dealt with in my life. You know, it's given me a window to look out of, and it's just opened up another side of me. Um, for a long time, I've worked corporate jobs, but I never took time out for myself, you know? So in a way, life kind of kicked me off of a cliff, and here I am now. Um, as far as public art, We Are Water, the piece that we're going to talk about today, is my first permanent public art piece. Prior to this, I've done exhibits and I've done public art installations, but they weren't permanent. So I'll leave you with that, and we will get into my experience with my first public art piece, We Are Water. Next slide. So We Are Water, I'm going to kind of scoot into the screen so I can kind of see what it says. But We Are Water was the name of the artist call that I actually applied to. And that paragraph blurb that you see right there was the scope of the work. So essentially, it was to design a piece of work for the Black or African American community in the Central District, using water as a theme, using water um, in a way that, you know, showing how water connects us to places in history. So when I seen this artist call, it really, really spoke to me because I'm from the Central District. I know it like the back of my hand. It's what shaped me as an artist today. But I was wondering, well, how does water connect us? And it's very cliche to say that, oh, water connects us because it rains in Seattle all the time. But I had to understand what water was and what it meant to our community. And I worked with a support team, which is the Wanawari Collective. And before I accepted this artist call or even applied for it, Wanawari, that collective, was already doing the legwork, connecting with the community, what they wanted in an art piece to fit on this really, really weird retainer wall that goes down the main street of my community, which is 23rd Ave. It's this really awkward wall that goes down the hill and it kind of leans to the back a little bit. It's kind of awkward. But anyways, they did the legwork, they spoke with the community, and they got the understanding of what the community wanted in an art piece. So when I applied for the artist call and eventually was accepted for the artist call, I had the opportunity to listen to some of the tapes. There was audio tapes that they recorded of community voices speaking about what water meant to them. There was also picture books of different bodies of water, whether it had been lakes or glasses of water or people drinking water, rivers, swimming pools, water hoses. I also was provided a picture book of pictures of the community dating back to the 40s and the 50s. So that's how I found the inspiration for my concept. And if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you will kind of see the original concept, which shows a water hose and a splash of water that says Central District. And at the bottom, that was more of the developed concept. And the way I came up with that concept was, excuse me, I was looking through a picture book and I seen a water hose with water coming out of it. And when I seen it, the light came on. I said, that's it right there. And when I seen that water hose, it reminded me of when I was a child and I used to go outside and play. And if we played football in the street, that would be the water hose that we would run to get a drink of water from. Or when it was hot outside, that would be the water hose that we used to get wet or fill up the swimming pool. So that's where the concept of the child holding the water hose came from. I also had to understand what water meant to me and the community, and water is life. So if we're talking about water being life, when it comes to this particular community, the Central District, who is the life of that community? We are the people. So if water is life, then the people are the life of this community. So that's how I tied in the rest of the concept. I think the part that I'm forgetting to tell you is that before this public art piece, the other installations that I've done, I use the faces of the people from my community. Gathered all of these pictures and did these collages. So the community really responded well to that. That was something that they were really able to identify with. You know, oftentimes there's art in our communities and it's beautiful art, but sometimes we just drive past it and say, hey, that's a nice picture, but rarely do we go up to the art and touch it and become one with it and really look at it or can identify with it sometimes. So I know from working with my community, I got a good, you know, the response to it was really, really great because they were able to go touch it. And I got, you know, again, the response was really, really great. So I was able to understand what the community wanted. So once we came up with the concept, that moves us to community engagement. So once I came up with this concept, I had to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to get these pictures? So what we did was community engagement functions. And if you look at this slide here, these are a couple of pictures from our community engagement function where we put Central District on the wall. I wanted to put Central District on the wall in my community because we are very prideful about this neighborhood, but there's never been anything on the wall to say, hey, we are in the Central District. So I put Central District on the wall, and at this community engagement event, it gave the opportunity to connect with the community. It gave the opportunity for the community to connect with the artists. So if you look in the picture on the top right-hand corner, you will see a few people standing in front of a map. And this was literally a map of the Central District where people could come and take a pen and a piece of thread or yarn and trace their routes to the grocery store that they took from their house, or you could walk from your grocery house. I'm sorry, from your grocery house, from your house to the grocery store, from your house to school, from your house to the park. So, you know, you had people engaging in activities where they were able to trace their paths, whether it be childhood or adulthood. You see the Facebook and Instagram icons at the bottom. A lot of the pictures were also collected through social media, reaching out to the community through social media. You can go to the next slide. There we go. These are more pictures from my community engagement event. And one of the pictures you see me connecting with people from the community. And these are people that I may have never connected with. So you get to, once again, hear the community voices. You get to share stories. The picture in the top right-hand corner are pictures that people brought in to be scanned. We had a scan station set up where people were able to bring 3 to 5 pictures to be included in the mural, and we will scan them in. In the picture below that, on the bottom right-hand corner, you see someone drawing inside of the letters. And again, that ties into the concept of me putting Central District on this wall. Inside of each of these letters, you will have faces of people from the community, which would be a part of the story that the child holding the water hose is telling. Next slide. We're going to get in at this point to finding balance. Finding balance is very important in something like this. You can hit the next slide, Jason. So, you know, finding balance could be kind of quirky, but also it could be kind of simple. What you do want to remember is that you are the one that was selected for this artist call. So we do know that when we apply for artist calls, that they ask for a bio, that they ask to see work samples and different things like that. So you are showing who you are as an artist. You are showing your aesthetic. So it's very important to stay true to your identity, because you're not really being asked to deviate. You're being asked to create a piece of art within your medium, within your aesthetic, because whoever is doing the art call already see what you're capable of. Let me scoot in a little bit closer. So you want to stay true to yourself and your identity in your identity as an artist. You want to divide the pie, and you want to accommodate everyone involved. And what I mean by dividing the pie is, for instance, with me in finding my balance, I had to understand that I had to give something to my community, and I had to make sure that I honor my commitment with the city. And I also had to make sure that I give a piece for myself. So when you divide that pie, for instance, for me, I divided my pie into three. When it came to the community, I wanted to make sure that I gave my community something that they can identify with, something that would make them proud, something that would make them smile, and more importantly, the pillars of my community. And community means a lot to me. So I just wanted to make sure that I honor them, because that's what the artist call asks for. So I wanted to make sure that I honor my community, that I make them smile, and that I gave them a piece. As for me, I wanted to make sure that I gave a piece of art that I could stand on, a piece of art that fit my aesthetic and that I wasn't deviating from, something that represented myself as an artist as well. And when it came to the Office of Arts and Culture, I wanted to make sure that I honored my commitment with them. And I also wanted to make sure that I did not put anything inflammatory in the art that would be offensive to other communities of people outside of my own. You know, right now, my community is going through a very big gentrification process, and that could be kind of touchy at times. So I wanted to make sure that I provided the city and my community with a concept that we could all stand on and relate to, and that, again, no one is offended. The city will stand behind it and stand on it for me, and that they will support me in it. So again, don't deviate from who you are as an artist, stand true to that, but make sure that you honor your commitment and that you serve the people that needs to be served in the art that you provide. Next slide. Here we are, we're going to talk about some challenges, and there's a few challenges that I actually faced during my process. I put a quote here that said, "There will always be challenges during the process. Remember, there's a solution for every problem and sometimes a silver lining." So with my process, my challenges came with the budget. I'm into things that look kind of shiny and gaudy, and I love the look of resin when I create art inside the studio. So when I worked with the fabricators, I knew that there was a specific budget for me to work with. So I wanted my letters to look a certain way. Again, I was doing Central District, and I wanted to put the faces of people in the community inside of these letters. So I chose to go with a material that was porcelain on enamel. And the production of those letters, I wanted to trim around those letters, which was steel backing, and I wanted that painted in red. The production of those letters sucked up a lot of the budget, but I also had to create a spray of water that also would have supported the backing of those letters that would have went down this wall. The wall is 158 feet long, or the length of my design was 158 feet long. So once we were done with the design of the letters, there wasn't enough money left to fabricate the water. And also, it would have been very challenging to cut the water in a water form to make it flow free and natural. So once we realized that there wasn't enough budget to create the water, we started figuring out ways to, well, how can we make the water or have the water still there within our budget? You know, we had to find a way. And after kind of changing the art and that not fitting right, the project manager at the time recommended that we have someone paint it. And I'll be quite honest with you, this was my first public piece of work. I didn't want anyone touching my art, you know. That was the challenge for me as well. But after a night or two of thinking about it, I said, you know what? That would be a great resolution for this problem. It would give me the opportunity to be able to collaborate with another artist and add more life to the art piece. And Perry Roden is the artist who we actually commissioned to paint the water. So if you look at the bottom, you see her hand and the brush stroke of the water. She was the silver lining in my project. I think when we connected with Perry and she accepted the commission, it gave my art piece a true mixed media feel on a public wall. So the water was not fabricated, the water was actually painted down the wall, and my fabricated art pieces sat on top of it, which gave it more of a 3D effect. So, you know, keep in mind that there's always going to be challenges, but I believe that there's a silver lining in every challenge. And I think with Miss Perry, we really found the silver lining. And I believe that the art came out just as beautiful. We can hit the next slide. This is the finished piece of the wall right here. It's more of a panoramic shot. You could kind of see the painting on the wall where Perry actually laid the water and the fabricated letters that sat on top of it. You can hit the next slide. This is the picture of the child holding the water hose. So I shot that picture of the child actually in studio and connected a water hose. Well, we shot her with the water hose in the studio, and that piece of the child stands about 80 feet. So it's about 6 feet. Oh, I'm sorry, 80 feet, 80 inches. It's about 6 feet, 6 inches. So she is fabricated in porcelain on enamel. And right where the water hose ends is where the painting of the water actually starts. And, you know, again, back to finding the silver lining in the challenges, I honestly believe that if the water was fabricated, it wouldn't have provided the texture that the actual painting does. The painting of the water provides a lot more texture than I believe the fabrication of the water would have had. Next selection. These are more up close shots of the actual letters with the painted water behind the back of it. At the end of the day, I think that my first experience with my public art piece was a success. And once you complete your first public art piece, you should look at it as a success as well, because it is your first and you've completed it. There's always going to be things that you will see in the art piece that you feel that you could have done better. But overall, my piece was a success for me because it was something that I completed from start to finish. It would be there forever. And I was able to give back and pay homage to my community, the pillars in the community, the people in the community. And the response have been great. You know, it really does something for me when I get a message from someone of my generation saying that they took their grandmother up to the piece and it brought back nostalgic feelings for them, or they were able to see how our community used to look, or, you know, how they would see their neighbor or their school teacher in the art piece, you know. So I would say that while creating my art piece, there was a lot of nights where I didn't sleep. There was some nights where I wondered if I got a specific person inside the mural. And you know, another thing that I dealt with is, you know, you can't get everyone. And you do want to keep in mind that when you put up a public piece of art, you cannot please everyone. Um, you know, there's always going to be a balance. So again, there's going to be some people that like the food, but they're going to say, oh, it's too much salt or it's too much pepper. But at the end of the day, what matters is if you served a healthy meal, you know, and if you did your due diligence, again, if you honored that commitment, and if you put something for everyone within your art piece. So stay true to yourself, push through your adversity, and be who you are as an artist. And don't be afraid to grow. Don't be afraid of the challenges, and keep an open mind. We could go to the next slide. Here we are again at the finish line. So here's a few pictures of the child who I featured in the art piece sitting on top of the art piece. And I selected her because she's a child from the neighborhood. She reminded me of the child that I played with when I was a kid, holding the water hose. So that's why I selected her for that art piece. There's the picture of the water that I never thought was going to be fabricated, or that there was times where I didn't know how that water was going to be on that wall. But there's a picture of the water and it happened. And there's a picture of Miss Perry. And I want to give a big shout out to Perry. That's a picture of Perry actually painting the wall, you know, the silver lining. And this is the finish line of my public art piece. There may be one more slide after that. And this is a quote that actually came off of my plaque that is up on the wall. And it says, like water, we are the flow, resilience, strength, and life of our community. And that's what I wanted to portray in that art piece. And this sums up my presentation. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you, Melvin. That was really touching. It's good to see. So up next, we have Sarah Thompson Moore, who will be talking about her current project she's working on here in Seattle, where she's currently in the design phase.
Hi, thank you, Jason, and thanks for having me here. And wanted to also thank Norie and Melvin for sharing your experiences with us. I think that was really great to hear. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, but I think I'm going to turn my camera off just to make sure I have continued good connectivity. So bear with me, and we'll move through the presentation that way. So I'm a regional artist of the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Oregon and Idaho, and I currently live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, right across the border from Spokane, Washington. These are some images of past, current, and upcoming projects that I'm working on. I enjoy creating works that exist within a natural setting and that interact with the environment to create space for contemplation and communion with nature. And recently I've had increasing opportunities to engage with cultural and historical themes in my work, both for my own tribe, the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua, and I'm wrapping up an installation right now along the Spokane River that was developed with the consultation and support of the Spokane Tribe of Indians, as it is located on their ancestral fishing grounds. I've also, as Jason mentioned, been developing an artwork with Seattle Public Utilities and Seattle Arts for almost a year now. And I feel that this project is pretty pertinent to the discussion that we're having. It has been full of challenges and opportunities for me to grow in my understanding of why I'm making public art and how to maintain my artist mind or vision, if you will, along with all of the matters that are inherent in making these public works happen. So I thought I would just take you through my journey with this particular project and also share with you some of the twists and turns along the way. Next, that's the slide. So this is the Aokai Pump Station 38 project, and the original call to artists was from Seattle Office of Arts and Culture in partnership with Seattle Public Utilities. They're looking for an artist that would develop, fabricate, and install a site-specific permanent artwork that integrates into the ground plane above this renovated pump station. The pump station's underground. It's going to be renovated, and they want something to go over the top of it. Something that was thought-provoking, that would draw attention to the site. And the artist would be expected to create renderings and construction documents and attend regular meetings and collaborate with SPU's design team, and also attend stakeholder and community meetings. And the budget for this project is $50,000. So let's see, next slide. I wanted to mention too that when I became a finalist for this project, I went to Seattle for an interview, and this was back in October last year. And while I was in Seattle, I made sure to spend time at the site, recording, any observation I could come up with, taking tons of photos in and around the site and along the trail. And Norie touched on this, but this initial site visit ended up being extremely important, because not long after, I was selected and we went through the contracting and we started moving in on working on the project, the pandemic took hold, and I have not been to Seattle since. So, I had out all these plans of regular trips to Seattle for this project if I was selected, but, things have happened very differently than anyone expected. And so I just wanted to reiterate that that's great advice that had been given to me, that if you're interested in a project, get to the site as soon as you possibly can, even if you haven't been selected, if you're just in the kind of beginning phases of being interested in the project. This site in particular, as things move forward with conversations with the design team about the requirements and the parameters of the site, I have been working with a great project manager who's on this call here, Becky Johnson, and she's been my go-to person for this project. And I am not ashamed to admit that I would be really lost without her help in guiding me through the various nuances. And so make use of those resources you have available to you in these projects, and ask questions and use, lean on them to the extent that you need to. So the site parameters around this this particular project, you can see a layout of what the surface, above ground surface was planned, a concrete pad there connecting to the sidewalk. I was told that there may be pushback from the community if I were to propose something that went vertical, because this would be obstructing the views, which are really important to the community. And I needed to work on the ground plane with products or materials that would not be slippery and that would not present a trip hazard. And as you will know, would work around all of these various utility hatchet covers and doors. And there's a utility box in the lower right as well. So the artwork also had to be durable enough for maintenance vehicles to occasionally drive onto it. And, it would have consistent saltwater spray on it. And it also had to kind of fit within the planned renovation footprint. So thanks to my site visit photos, one of the things I realized right offhand and I ruled out was that I wasn't going to use any night lighting options for this project, because you'll notice that it's right under a street lamp. And so those were some of so the more I kind of leaned into this project, the more I learned about it, the more clearly challenging that this site became. And, in addition to all these parameters, there were several stakeholders involved. We had, and Becky really helped me keep track of these, but part of the installation is on Parks property, so the Parks Department's involved, working with Seattle Public Utilities and their landscape architect. The Department of Transportation is involved, and shoreline permitting applies as we're right along the shore there. And as well as, the Office of Arts and Culture, who I'm working through as well. So, and then not to mention the community that's surrounding the site. So the burning question for this project really has been, how do I create and maintain a concept that's authentic to me and the work that I want to make, while also trying to work through all of these different parameters and restrictions, really, is what kind of started to feel like. Well, I'm still kind of figuring the answer out to that, so I'm getting closer, but on the next slide, I'll show you my initial concept, or talk about how I kind of came to my initial concept. I researched Aokai's history a lot, and I learned about the native inhabitants of the area and the natural history there, specifically before European settlement, and all the resources that were available in abundance, and how drastically the landscape has changed over the past 150 years. And I started making more of a personal connection to the fact that these underground pump stations are part of a vast hidden network that are our human effort to mitigate the damages of the urban environment and to prevent further waste pollution to our most precious resource, which is the water. And I discovered a topographical map of the region from 1894, so the earlier years of settlement, and which I ended up modeling my design after. The map describes West Seattle's terrain as it existed in the earlier years of settlement. And I find that the lines on the map are visually striking, and they are inspiring to me. And they reminded me a lot of some of the layers of the story of Aokai that I was learning about. And to me, they sort of resemble tree rings, which symbolize the progression of time, and also tie into the history of the ancient Western red cedar forests that once existed in the area and were very important to the way of life of the native people. The lines also reminded me of shellfish, which is a significant area of food source and is no longer edible in many cases due to the pollution of the water. And the lines also resemble ripples in water, which to me symbolize cause and effect, and water being the main source of food and travel for the indigenous cultures, and is of course vital for all life. And finally, the lines also resembled fingerprints to me, which made me think about how I would like to leave my own mark on this planet. And so this topographical map really just, I began to see it as both a literal and a figurative interpretation of this story of Aokai, and I wanted to use it to tell that story. So I also knew that incorporating elements of the history and culture of the area's native inhabitants was a very important piece to that story. In order to do this, I would need to consult with the area tribes and consider Aokai part of their ancestral homeland. Next slide. So this was my initial concept drawing. You will notice that I definitely tried for a vertical element. I knew this was a little bit of a risk, but my idea was that if I made it see-through with using perforated metal, that this would create a map overlay effect and blend the art up from the ground plane into the landscape. And it would also provide a functional element of safety at the site, because at the back edge of that concrete, there would be a step down, and then you're at the seawall, which is another, I think, 6 to 8 foot drop. So I was thinking that was a good thing to have in place for safety concerns if someone were to lose their footing on that step down off the back edge. So the thought then with this concept was that we put this out to the community and see if we can get them on board with the idea of having something vertical. especially if it provided safety and was see-through. And also, I sought the consultation with an engineer to get a basic idea of what the structural logistics would be for this. I also curved the border of the concrete pad to match the shape of the artwork and to give it a more organic feel at the site. The next slide. So I began creating my materials for the outreach, for community outreach, working with SPU, had a really great outreach and community engagement team. I think if you click next, let's see what happens. Oh, yeah, there they go. So shortly before we were ready to launch our outreach plan, the project team had a meeting with Shoreline Permitting. And during that meeting, it was determined that the vertical element would be a violation of shoreline code. And also the curvature of the concrete pad or any manipulation of the planned construction for the sake of the artwork would likely not be accepted as well. So yeah, at that point, I kind of started to feel like, wow, I am really being placed kind of in a literal box here, a box that has a bunch of other little boxes inside of it that I need to work around. And it kind of began to feel limiting. But, you know, I think both Norie and Melvin touched on this idea too, that, and I believe that it's, that my perceived limitations can lead to unexpected and some amazing things like those silver linings that Melvin talked about. So I really try to keep an open mind when things don't go the way I initially plan. And you know, really, I knew that this could be a possible outcome. And so I already had a pretty good idea of what I would do if this were the case. But it was July 23rd when I received this news, and I needed to have all of my new design materials updated for our outreach schedule by the beginning of August. So that kind of was a stressful time. We could go to the next slide. So this is my updated rendering. And I will say that working around the number of utility hatches and access covers at this site really does present a big challenge for how to lay out the design. The benefit of having a for sure no on the vertical element was that it was now really clear to me that I could focus my efforts and funds on the ground plane. And this meant the opportunity to discover new materials and techniques that I could utilize. First, though, we needed to get the initial concept out to the community so that we could share the input we received at the upcoming presentations to the SPU's Design Innovation Lab, the Office of Arts and Culture, and eventually Parks ProView. Excuse me. So the community outreach that we did during the pandemic, we had some limitations, right, about what we could actually do. And so what it consisted of was information about the pump station renovation, information about the artwork, and a survey of questions relating to both topics. And I composed the questions pertaining to the artwork, and the outreach team through SPU put everything together and took care of the distribution. And the survey went live in the beginning of August, and I think we received pretty good feedback, upwards of 60 to 70 responses over the course of 2 weeks. So that was pretty good considering, and 70% of the responders lived right next to the site or were within walking distance, and most of them visited the site quite regularly and were really connected to the natural beauty of the area, as you could imagine. And as you could also imagine, there were a variety of responses to the artwork concept. Next, you can see some of those responses there. What I did discover was just how passionate about this place that the community is. And that came out in various forms, ranging from wonderful soul-affirming descriptions of Aokai to vehement questions about why the artist chosen was not local or native. And I learned that the highest goals that the community responders had for the artwork were, one, that it integrate well into the beautiful setting, two, that it relate to nature, and three, that it expresses a connection to the history of the site. So I learned that I was on track with the themes that I was exploring in the work. There were many positive and negative comments, and it definitely took a bit of time to process them all for me. You know, I'm not gonna lie, there was a little bit of sulking because, you know, I felt misunderstood, or even a little depressed because, you know, some people are mean. But also there was hope because other people really saw the vision and were on board with all of it. So it was finding a way to move forward with the information, and that really meant filtering out emotions and misunderstandings within the comments. So what can I take away from these comments? And on the next slide, I'll kind of show you how I worked that out. Some of the main takeaways that I received from that initial community input was there was a strong desire to incorporate history and culture of the native inhabitants of the area. So I knew that I was on track with moving forward with the idea of contacting the area tribes and beginning to solidify what elements would be incorporated there. And there were concerns about the selected artist. So I felt they needed more information about my background and maybe some more transparency about how the selection process worked. There were also concerns about having concrete added to the site and what type of materials were being used with the artwork, as well as concerns about whether there was value or need for art at the site at all. And so the resolution would be to provide a better understanding of what the site would be like without the artwork. I felt that would be helpful. And they wanted more. Some responders wanted more from the artwork. They wanted, well, why not something three-dimensional? Why not something kinetic or interactive, or, you know, use different materials? So it was clear that they needed a little more information about the parameters of the site and the restrictions that needed to be worked around in order to put artwork here. So again, with the limitations of not being able to do in-person community outreach, we thought, okay, we'll address these with another round, a PDF or something with more information. But the SPU's outreach team had a great idea to create a video presentation. And this way folks could hear directly from me and not be bothered to read pages of descriptive text. And so this was something that was really useful coming out of these limitations. And I've already used this tool on another project as well. So that was kind of a nice thing to come out of that. The next slide, I will tell you a little bit about the opportunities I've had with the limitations and working with just the ground plane and the concrete box, if you will. I've been able to discover and learn about some exciting materials and techniques. And I've been looking at materials that are reactive to lighting conditions and weather, because I want the artwork to both integrate into and respond to the surrounding environment in subtle ways. And this ties into one of the ongoing themes of my work in general, which is to create art that is in conversation or collaboration with the natural environment and provides a unique experience with each visit. On the next slide, please. I also wanted to share with you another useful tool that I've discovered while working on this project. And it's that it can be really helpful or effective to provide comparison visuals to better illustrate what you're trying to achieve or you're trying to propose. And this has been useful in two particular instances on this project. I learned that the community needed to better understand that a concrete pad is going to be at this site regardless of the artwork. So creating a before and after illustration for my video presentation really made that visually clear. And I think it helped kind of get that point across right away. And the second instance was kind of early on. I wanted to convey to SPU and the other stakeholders that there was an advantage to using specialty infill style utility access doors at this site. Sharing the with or without images made it really easy to see why that would be a good choice to integrate the design over the top of the hatches as best as possible. On the next slide. So we brought the concept to design, the concept to the Design Innovation Lab for SPU in the middle of August, and then reviewed it with the Office of Arts and Culture staff at the end of August. And around that time, I received an updated site drawing from SPU. And so you'll notice that an extra strip of concrete appeared where there wasn't one before, below the sidewalk there. And this was an opportunity to extend the canvas of my art, if you will, but it also was a good reminder, a good thing to keep in mind that alterations in project construction may require further adjustments to the artwork as projects like these progress. So it's good to kind of keep that in mind as you're working along. And the next slide. So September 1st was the presentation to Parks ProView. And during that meeting, there was a strong safety concern for the step-down concrete ledge just before the seawall. So Parks wants to see that safety issue addressed. And as of mid-September, now SPU is incorporating a safety guardrail into their plans. And so now I'm working with them and their landscape architect to find a solution that integrates with the artwork. So now we're back to a vertical element that provides safety, but the parameters of this are very specific and relate to code requirements for safety railing and whatnot. So that's kind of the direction it's going. When I mentioned the twists and turns, that's one example, another example. So for my last slide, now moving forward with this project, my next steps are over the next few months would be to finalize my information that's going to be incorporated through the tribal consultation, and then working on that railing design and with the landscape architects to talk about some planting options, native plants and whatnot around the site. And I'm going to create an updated outreach video with the design progression as it is now, so that can be kind of an update to the community and those interested. And be working to finalize design drawings and construction plan and my materials and install method. And I did make mention of the utility box that will be wrapped with imagery and interpretive text. So that's something that needs to happen as well. So in conclusion, to kind of tie in to the question that we were discussing today, my answer is really still evolving, but one of the things that I wanted to say was that when trying to get through the challenges of these projects, I have a tendency to think of the saying mind over matter, but I'm actually finding that perhaps it's more productive to change that saying to mind and matter, because really there is a collaborative relationship going on between what my mind and vision is as an artist and the actual matters that will allow that vision to come to fruition. And really it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and it works better when we're working together rather than against those things. So a collaborative mindset is really very helpful. And I think another useful strategy is to think broad in the beginning of these projects and look at the journey as a honing process, both for the work, but also as an artist and on a personal level. So yeah, that's all I've got. And thanks for inviting me to share with you today.
Great. Thank you, Norie, Melvin, and Sarah. So great presentations. So I guess at this point, we can take questions from the audience. And so I think we can, Becky and Maya can sort of go through the Q&As and see what has been asked, and we'll have a little back and forth from the artists.
Absolutely. So we've gotten a couple questions specifically about materials. One specifically for Norie, of what was the material of the Arizona project, and one specifically for Sarah about how you find your vendors and partners to discover new materials. And so maybe Norie, if you want to go first and talk a little bit about what was the material used in the Arizona project and how you go about finding new materials to use in your projects.
Hi, everyone. This was very great to kind of hear both Melvin and Sarah, and to really talk about kind of the challenges that we always have in not only developing the content, but really seeing it through the entire process. And that has been really great to see. So let me talk a bit about the materials. The materials for the Arizona project were acrylic for the panel. We used a 1/2 inch thick acrylic. I think it was 1/2 inch. It's so funny how you forget. 1/2 inch thick acrylic that was kind of a frosted acrylic that was cut to size and attached to a stainless steel structure. And then the dots in the back were colored mylar dots that were attached to a stainless steel rod. And what's particularly interesting about the challenges of making public art is really finding the materials that are workable and doable and usable. So the materials for the dots, for instance, were relatively inexpensive. They already occur with pins. They kind of come with pins that go into these plastic strips. So one could have used those directly. However, I was worried about the longevity of them. So I had to develop a way to attach them to a stainless rod, basically, that would last, and then to figure out how to attach them to the stainless rod so that they would have a ability to move. And I ended up using shaft collars for that purpose. Don't ask me how I came up with that idea, but then trying to find the shaft collars were really a challenge. Finally, because I had to find 5,000 of them of a certain size, and I remember talking with a couple suppliers, and they're like, "Are you going to be ordering this many on a regular basis? Do we need to up our supply chain to do this, or is it going to be a one-time use?" And I had to tell them, "I'm sorry, it's just a one-time use." But I really scoured the entire U.S. for them, and then I had to wait actually to get I think a new shipment in from China. So all of these challenges they become very individual depending on the material, and you do have to think a lot about how these materials not only interact with the environment, but also how one can work with them to be able to apply them to the particular project. So it takes a little bit of research to do that.
Yeah, and I would second that. I mean, I just do a lot of research. I start thinking in terms of, okay, what am I trying to achieve here? What do I want? What would I like to do? And then I just kind of do a Google search and see if it already exists out there. And that's a good way to just find right off the bat. I use Pinterest. I have folders for every project where anything I see that I like, I just put it, and then I can go back to it at any time. And I mean, that's really useful. And yeah, I spend a lot of time researching materials. And when I find materials that I'm interested in, even if it's not going to be used for this project, I usually will call the manufacturer and talk to them about it and get some details and maybe get some samples. I have a stash of samples of different things. I really enjoy looking into different materials. There's a lot of innovation out there just within the field of architecture and construction and all that. So that's kind of what I do. It's sort of also a side hobby.
I know I just muted, but I'm unmuting again. The whole idea of research for materials is really important. And I think part of it too is always having your eyes open to materials and paying attention to what other projects are being done and what artists are using. I think we can learn a lot from other artists as well as our, fabricators. And it's like the important thing is really to kind of keep those networks alive and to really depend on sometimes on our fabricators to help us to discover some materials or know how to use them.
Great. There's a couple of follow-up questions about materials, specifically in regards to budget and fabricator, and a specific question to Melvin of who is your enamel fabricator. So I would like to start with Melvin to talk about budgeting for materials.
So for my project, the fabricator was a company called Windsor Fireform. I believe they are out of Lacey, Washington. And the work that they do at Windsor is either tile or they have another method with it, which is porcelain on enamel. So what I wanted something, when I did my art piece, I wanted something that looked kind of glossy. So with each of the letters that were created, I had to design the letters in like a Photoshop program. So I had to kind of collage all of these pictures together. And what they would do is they would print them out and they would put like this enamel or porcelain finish on the top. So it kind of gave it like a glass-like coating. And with that, it kind of reminded me of the resin that I used. So I wanted something shiny. I wanted something that was going to last. So I went with porcelain on enamel, but they also did more of a ceramic tile. And that's not what I really wanted for the wall. But as far as I know, those are the two types of fabrication that they do at Windsor Fireform. And I didn't really have to look for materials because when I accepted the artist call, the fabricator was already chosen for this project. So I kind of went with what they offered as a fabrication company. Can y'all hear me? Yeah, there.
Great. Norie, anything you'd like to add about budgeting for materials that you haven't used previously?
It's pretty hard, I would say. We do the best we can. And I think there's a lot through experience that you can kind of get a sense of what things will cost. But really, it's kind of talking with the fabricators and the suppliers to really see if it's possible to get in the ballpark for the costs. And, sometimes the materials are just too expensive and you can't use them. And so you have to find another way to do it. Some suppliers cost more than other suppliers. It really just depends.
Yeah, it's kind of an ongoing sort of challenge. It's one of those layers that is continually in the peripheral of your whole planning process, right? And there have been times where, maybe you get an idea, or I've gotten an idea for what I want to see, and here's the perfect material to do it. But, oh, that's way out of budget. So let's think of something that can get me there, either conceptually or visually or whatever the case, and see if that might be an alternative substitute. Also, like on this last project I've been working on, I discovered a new resource that I didn't know about just because I wanted to use a lot of steel rods for this project, and I knew right away it wasn't going to be in the budget that I had. It was just too much steel. And so I started thinking, well, okay, let's search for, maybe there's a source for recycled steel rods, because I didn't need them to be beautiful. I needed them to be kind of rusty and, like old. So that's where I discovered steel sucker rod, which is a byproduct of the oil industry. They are these long, solid steel rods that are utilized in the oil pumps, and they get discarded, and they're in scrap piles all throughout, the Dakotas and Texas, because they're constantly needing to be replaced. And you have just this great resource for material that I was unaware of, and it allowed me to make that project happen. So being resourceful is also key, I think, in that. And not giving up right away when the answer is no, like just trying to find a way.
Yeah, I would like to also add, like during my project, I knew how I wanted the letters to look, and I knew what type of finish I wanted once I was presented with the materials. So one thing I had to do to cut costs was, instead of having all of the images in color, print those images in black and white, which would have saved a lot of costs during the fabrication of my letters. I chose to kind of go with black and white images, which will also give it a more classic feel than color images to save money. Also, when we were trying to figure out how to fabricate the water, I also wanted the water porcelain on enamel. I wanted everything to look a certain way, so there were options that came up, whereas we could have used tile, but when we looked at the installation, it was just simply way too much tile squares to kind of create this water to go down this wall that was anywhere between 150 something feet to 200 feet. So the budgeting process, this was my first public art piece, and I've never worked with budgeting before. But I kind of leaned on a look that I wanted, and then I tried to keep that look within a specific budget, and that's how the water ended up being painted. So, essentially, there was some wiggle room, and eventually I accomplished what I wanted. But, you have to kind of figure out a way to rob Peter to pay Paul, if you will, get what you want within your budget.
If I could just say something too about the budget, is that I think it's really important when you're thinking about your concept and kind of the scope of the artwork that you're trying to make, is that you do not over-promise and over-deliver the work that costs more than you have. I guess that's what I mean. Not that we don't want to over-deliver in, other ways, but it's really important that you don't starve in the process of making these public art projects. And so there's always a bit of this back and forth where the material and the budget helps to inform the concept. And that's why the core of the concept is really important, but you need to be flexible in terms of the material and the size and the form that it might take.
Yes, yeah.
Great, thank you. So another artist hands-on is the expectation with calls for public art that the artist is primarily bringing concept, but others will be doing all the fabrication and installation. And maybe I'll kick back to one of actually the project managers to speak generally about that, and then ask the artist to follow up with comments. Jason or Becky?
I'm happy to take it. Thanks, Maya. I think it depends on the calls. Sometimes calls are for design only, and then the artist would work with the project manager as they select a fabricator and installer. That's one avenue. Most of our avenues are turnkey, where the artist is responsible for design, fabrication, and installation. And depending on what that artwork is and what the specialties of the artist is, really determines how hands-on that is. And if it's connected to a bigger capital project. So if it's a standalone project, it would really be the responsibility of the artist to kind of do everything from start to finish and subcontract out what they don't have the specialty skills to do. That's very common. And if there is something connected to a larger capital project, there are times where there can be collaborative support for installing things similar to like what Sarah's working on now. We're working with seeing what we can get into the design documents for a contractor to help with, since that is not her specialty. And I'll leave it at that and hand it over to any of the three artists.
Well, I can speak. As far as hands-on with my project, it was really hands-on for me because I designed basically 15 letters that read Central District. And for my project, I had to come up with the design, but I had to build that design in the system. And I tell you, it was definitely a challenge. I'm not really a Photoshop or Adobe expert. So in the beginning, I didn't even know how to build a concept. And there was a point where I literally sat in front of my computer for about 4 days straight, trying to figure out how to build these letters. And then I had to think about, well, am I going to pay someone? For a moment, I looked for a graphic designer, and I was like, well, I need a graphic designer to actually build my letters because I don't know how. And I had to think, what am I going to do? Give away the money that I make to pay someone to build this? And what am I going to have for myself? So after about 4 days of sitting in front of Photoshop with all of these pictures that I collected, I came up with a method and I built all of those letters myself. So it was hands-on for me. So I came up with the concept. I drew it the best I could because I'm not the best artist with the pencil, but I had to come up with the design, come up with the concept. I built each of those letters and placed every single one of those 300 pictures and built it out. Once it was fabricated and they brought the design to the site, that was also interesting because the wall is like this very, very weird shape. And I found myself looking through half of an eye saying, scoot over 2 inches. No, back this way, 3 inches, up some, down some. So I think even during the installation process, I found myself being pretty hands-on along with Perry, who did the water installation for me. So even though it was a call to design a piece, I found myself really hands-on with my project, giving directions and even creating it from the ground up. And that was my experience.
Yeah, and I would just say that for me, it depends on the project, and I really enjoy being hands-on. And I guess the nice thing about if you can physically do the design yourself, you are going to be able to pay yourself for that fabrication time rather than pay somebody else. So it's a nice way to earn your income, right? But sometimes, and I see this as maybe I get into higher budget projects, where it really does make sense when you get, not only do you get to think bigger and you get to think in whatever material you might dream of, but to recognize that there are going to be those people out there that can do it better than you and are going to be more proficient, and sometimes it's going to be a good idea to go ahead and utilize those resources. So it depends a lot on the budget. It depends on what you really want to do with it. So far, I've been pretty hands-on. I've had a project where I came up with a design. I built a lot of models for it, and then I went straight to a fabricator because they had all the giant equipment to bend big channels of steel. And I mean, I'm not going to do that, so I could take my model to them, my dimensions, my whole concept, and they actually drew it up on CAD and had all the digital equipment to just plug that information into their machines and do it. So there's definitely benefits either way. And yeah, it's part of that process of weighing and balancing like what makes sense on any given project.
I use a lot of fabricators and subcontractors in my work, but I always like to touch it myself, no matter what it is. And sometimes it's in the lead up to the fabrication, sort of the so-called design work and the kind of work that Melvin was talking about. He's not doing the porcelain enamel, but it's being done to his design, the work that he did. And so there's a lot of that kind of work that I do, even if it's not a physical touching of the final materials, but I still like to touch everything as much as I can. But, I agree with Sarah. Sometimes you just have to have a CAD person do the work for you if you don't work in CAD. And for me, I've just decided CAD is something I'm not going to learn. I just don't need it enough as a skill. Whereas I'm pretty good at Photoshop, CAD is, I draw the line. And there are a lot of processes now that require CAD work for cutting and shaping, for instance. I just hire that out. But I work closely with them still.
I want to just put a quick plug in about Sketchup, which is a program I've been learning over the last couple years. And if you are wanting to go in that direction of being able to create digital models, I really recommend it. It's a 3D CAD based kind of program, right? But it's very user friendly. They have a free version. You can make a lot just with the free version. And that's kind of where I started, and it's been very useful to me in creating my proposals because I can have, and also in, giving documents and information to fabricators or whoever might be constructing the work or bidding out the installation and that sort of thing. So if you want to go that way, but you don't necessarily want to learn CAD or SolidWorks or whatever, SketchUp might be a good place to start. And I certainly use it a lot and have been glad that I started learning it. And I use Photoshop as well. Those are the two that I really work with.
That's wonderful, Sarah. And that was actually our last question that we've received of what software you use for the rendering. So thanks for chiming in and speaking about that. Seeing no additional questions in the Q&A and nearing the noon hour, wanted to just wrap this session up and thank our panelists for sharing their expertise and their time. And thank you as well to all the attendees that tuned in this morning to listen to stories from Sarah, Norie, and Melvin, as well as submitting questions as well. Any final thoughts that we would like to share for the good for the order?
I believe in having fun, actually, with the projects, even though one is tearing one's hair out frequently. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think that comes across in the end product, right? Kind of maybe your mental state throughout the process, right? If you can latch onto those, like the essence of what you're trying to achieve throughout, regardless of what the twists and turns that and the obstacles you're faced with, and it will end up, really showing in the work.
What I will say for all of the boot campers is to trust the process and remember there was a time where you weren't here. There's going to be a time where, right now you may not have the artist call. You might apply for one tomorrow and you may get it. So, just remember that, art is something that you will forever grow in. And the project that you do today, there's going to be a bigger one tomorrow. Just kind of keep pushing and don't be afraid to grow. Keep an open mind. Create.
Great. Well, thank you for all of our speakers, Norie Sato, Melvin Freeman, and Sarah Thompson Moore. And thank you all for joining us today for this workshop. Once again, this workshop has been recorded and will be on our YouTube site in about a week or so, and we will send a link out when that's available. So thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend.